Are you listening to me, Lennon?
Fuck you!
Well, that didn't last long. I'm sorry guys, I know I said I would mostly focus on musicals for the time being, and I will, but immediately after uploading my Hedwig video, I was struck with inspiration to go back on my word, as I was looking through my Blu-rays for more musicals to review. Two of the ones I saw were A Hard Day's Night and Yellow Submarine, both movies starring the Beatles, one of my favorite bands of all time, and both jukebox musicals featuring their music. I wanted to do a Beatles video, but I felt that just singing the praises of two universally loved movies, one of which is in the Criterion Collection by the way, was a bit cliche and overdone. Then I thought about making a video ranking every single studio album released by the Beatles, which is even more cliche and overdone, but the idea struck me with inspiration, so we're rolling with it. Sometimes my muses are a little strange, I'll admit. So that's where we're at currently. The one rule that I want to mention before getting into this list is that I am only counting the 13 British studio albums released by the Beatles that are considered part of their core catalog. So compilations like the Red and Blue albums don't count, American albums like Meet the Beatles and Beatles 65 don't count, and the Past Masters album that compiles all of their singles also does not count. With that, let's get into it. Here's my ranking of the entire Beatles discography.
It's one of those tiny yellow submarines. Yeah, you know the kind that are smaller than people and have an unlimited supply of torpedoes?
Yellow Submarine is trash. I like it. Not the movie, of course. That movie is one of my all-time favorites and I love it. I'm very specifically talking about the soundtrack album to it, which is considered to be a Beatles studio album despite only 1/3 of the album being actual original Beatles songs. For those out of the loop, the B-side of this album isn't even Beatles songs at all. It's a selection of pieces from the original orchestral score for the movie composed by George Martin. So that makes half of this album not even really a studio album. Then on the A-side, only 4 songs are completely original songs. 2 of the songs are re-released versions of Yellow Submarine from Revolver and All You Need Is Love from Magical Mystery Tour, which are great, but I can't count those either because they're just re-releases. And finally, in my opinion, only one of the 4 original songs is actually good. Please just keep in mind though that this part is just my opinion. There's a song by Paul McCartney called All Together Now, which is cute but kind of forgettable. There's 2 songs by George Harrison called Only a Northern Song and It's All Too Much, both of which are kind of mediocre. The only really great song on this album is the Lennon-McCartney collaboration Hey Bulldog, which fucking slaps and it's one of the best Beatles songs. Seriously, this was the only part of the album I was looking forward to listening to again. Everything else is either forgettable or has been released before, but Hey Bulldog is unironically amazing and so unbelievably catchy that I didn't mind listening to the album again for this video, just because I knew that song was waiting for me. However, you can listen to that song by itself in other places like the movie or the Beatles Rock Band video game. There's no real reason to listen to this album cover to cover when none of the other original pieces in it are good. This is the only Beatles album I would say is completely skippable except for Hey Bulldog. It's so skippable I'm getting bored talking about it, so let's move on.
It feels like somebody wants to sell me something!
Honestly, of every single Beatles album ever released, Beatles for Sale might be the messiest in terms of quality, and is also definitely the least talked about. I see people talking about Yellow Submarine occasionally for how unnecessary it is, but no one really talks about Beatles for Sale collectively as a full album. And there's a reason for that. Honestly, this is the most forgettable album the Beatles ever released in terms of the song listing, even though there are some good songs on there. No Reply is a really great tragic song about a lost love. I'm a Loser is a fantastic autobiographical song for John Lennon. Their cover of Rock and Roll Music by Chuck Berry is the best version of that song besides the original, as is the case with their cover of Words of Love by Buddy Holly. I'll Follow the Sun is easily the best song on the album, and I Wish It Were Longer. And 8 Days a Week is one of the most iconic Beatles songs of all time, and for good reason. The rest of the album from there is honestly hit or miss, and the whole thing feels very cobbled together, especially since there's way more covers on this album than on most of their previous albums. Also, why wasn't I Feel Fine included on this album when it was part of the recording sessions? Is this another Hey Jude moment where the addition of one song would have made a world of difference for the collective album? Either way, most of the songs on this one take a very somber tone and melancholy vibe in terms of the songwriting, which I love for Beatles songs usually, but here it gets really tiring. To be fair, the Beatles were starting to get really tired around this time after running around the whole world on tour during the height of Beatlemania. I think it's understandable why this album turned out the way it did, because they were doing tour after tour and getting heckled at almost every stop and still wanted to get another album out by the end of 1964. It's honestly really impressive when you take a step back that the whole album isn't complete garbage. The album does feel very tiring, but the Beatles were really tired. Either way, it's definitely not the worst album on this list. It's not that bad, just a bit underwhelming compared to the albums before. One last thing to note is that John Lennon sings the lead vocals on almost every song on this album, and the lack of the other band members' influence really comes through. It feels like a very early John Lennon album at points, rather than being a true Beatles album that stars all of them in their own way. I don't know, it's Beatles for sale. There's not much to say. Unlike this next ranking where there's a ton to say.
I'll have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 9 extra dip, a number 9, 2 number 9s, one with number 9, and a large number 9.
It's the bloody Beatles White Album, shut up.
Of every ranking I personally made on this list, this is the one that's going to get me in the most trouble. There are some genuine masterpieces on the Beatles' White Album that are among some of my favorite songs of all time, but there's also Revolution 9 and Wild Honey Pie. I don't like this album very much as a collective. Beatles for Sale might have been a mess in terms of being bland, but this album is a mess in terms of the quality being all over the place. I honestly need to make a whole video one day expressing how much I dislike this album and just how scattershot it is. And also, for having so many songs that are just shit, it's long. Very long. It's the only double album the Beatles ever released, where there were so many songs on it the album had to be split up into 2 records. Most of the songs written for the White Album were written during the Beatles' time in India with the Maharishi. But the problem is, so many of these songs are short little ditties with no real substance to them. Honestly, I feel the need to talk about every side of the album individually, just to give you a taste of what you're in for, in terms of varying visions, ideas, and quality. If you don't want to hear me ramble on about every song on the album, skip to 10 minutes 5 seconds. Okay, good. Side A starts off really strong with Back in the USSR, a sort of cross between a James Bond style tune and a Chuck Berry song with influence from the Beach Boys. It's a great start to the album, followed by one of the best Beatles songs in my humble opinion, Dear Prudence. Glass Onion is weird and bad, but not the absolute worst. It's just kinda not catchy or funny. Obla Di Obla Da is a song that's bad, but I happen to like it. I think it's okay, but acknowledge it's kind of grating. Wild Honey Pie is Wild Honey Pie.
Honey pie, honey pie.
The continuing story of Bungalow Bill is just okay, again, a song with no real substance. The side ends with 2 more of the best Beatles songs, While My Guitar Gently Weeps and Happiness is a Warm Gun. Side B starts with Martha My Dear, which is a cute little song Paul wrote about his dog. I'm So Tired is the drug song. Blackbird is the best song on the album and perhaps the best song Paul McCartney has ever written. It's a genuine masterpiece and a song that should be listened to by everyone. Piggies is Piggies. Rocky Raccoon gets on my nerves, to be honest, I can't stand the song. Don't Pass Me By is alright, but as far as Ringo songs go, I prefer Octopus's Garden. Why Don't We Do It in the Road is about having sex in the street, so it's the best Beatles song. I Will is a cute little ditty that reminds me of I'll Follow the Sun. I think it's nice. Julia is another amazing Lennon song dedicated to his mother, and the perfect song to close out the first record of the album. Side C goes immediately downhill with Birthday when it's kind of annoying, to be honest. Your Blues and Helter Skelter are 2 songs that are good that I happen to personally not like.
You what?
I got blisters on my penis! Sorry, I don't like the grungier Beatles songs personally, even though they're very influential. Mother Nature's Son is a beautiful ballad about being in harmony with nature. Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey is a short-ass song with a long-ass title. And honestly, the title is the best part. Sexy Sadie gets on my nerves too, to be honest. Long, Long, Long is a really nice and pleasant song, and a great George offering. Revolution 1 is the inferior version of the song. Honey Pie, not to be confused with Wild Honey Pie, is a nice little tune. Savoy Truffle I honestly don't like and think is one of the more forgettable songs George wrote with the group. Cry Baby Cry is alright, but nothing special. But nothing else on the album can prepare you for the absolute travesty of songwriting that is Revolution 9. This is John Lennon and Yoko Ono's disaster piece of a quote-unquote song, if you can even call it that. It's more of an experiment with sound than it is a real song. I'm not even going to play it here because playing the song for my girlfriend as a joke made her go into a slight autistic panic due to the nature of the song, and I'd hate to subject anyone else to that. Just look it up. It is without a doubt the single worst Beatles song, and how the other Beatles approved it for this album is beyond me. The last song on the album is called Good Night and gives off a very early Hollywood feel in terms of orchestration, almost like it's trying to apologize for the train wreck you just heard. You see what I mean though? I'm sure that even just hearing me talk about this album was the parasocial equivalent of emotional labor for you as the viewer, because it's a fucking mess. People who love this album and proclaim it as a masterpiece, I'm sorry, but I just don't understand and can't agree. I think it's an absolute disaster. The only reason it's above Yellow Submarine and Beatles for Sale is because it does have some genuinely amazing songs on it. If you'd want to listen to the best version of this album, I'd say listen to the songs shown on screen. Everything else you can honestly skip, and some of the songs I'd say to avoid like the fucking plague. That being said, some people do genuinely love this album, so I'd say listen to it if you have the time just to form your own take. But honestly, I don't think I'll ever listen to this album cover to cover ever again. And to that I say, good riddance. Okay, so we're almost done. Wait, there's more? There's 10 more? There's 10 more!
And everybody knows that the sequel's never quite as good.
So one thing I want to note before we go forward is that every album from this point forward is one that I consider to be good. Like, it's at least a 7 out of 10, if not higher. Before everybody goes into the comments thinking that I don't like their favorite Beatles album, save it unless you're a White Album fan. Either way, With the Beatles is pretty darn good. It's definitely not my favorite Beatles album, and I actually do prefer their previous and next albums by a considerable amount, but it's still a pretty good time. All My Loving and All I've Got to Do are both some of the best songs from this era of the band. I Want to Be Your Man is iconic. Please Mr. Postman and Roll Over Beethoven are pretty iconic covers, and I never expected the Beatles to do a musical theater cover, but their version of Till There Was You from the Music Man is incredibly soothing. As much as I love the sweeping romantic orchestra of the original, the Beatles version is just relaxing and nice. I think that a lot of the other songs on this album are just okay personally, but there's enough good material on here to pull it through to the top 10. And I think that some okay stuff with some great stuff is better than some bad or boring stuff with some great stuff, as is the case with Beatles for Sale and the White Album in my opinion. I definitely think this album could have benefited from squeezing I Wanna Hold Your Hand and She Loves You on there, since I believe those were from the same recording sessions, but even with those songs being missed, this is still a good album and a good time. Not a must listen necessarily, especially compared to some of the band's other work, but still good enough to earnestly recommend.
She was just 17. You know what I mean. I'm not sure I do know what you mean, Sir Paul.
Please Please Me is a good album and a great accomplishment. For those who aren't aware, the whole album was recorded in a single 12-hour long recording session. To compare, it took over 50 hours in the studio just to make the single song of Strawberry Fields Forever. Making a whole album in half a day, not to mention your first album, is amazing. And honestly, the album showed the Beatles' genius early on, with a slew of songs that would go on to become classics, including the title track, Love Me Do, P.S. I Love You, Do You Want to Know a Secret, Anna Go to Him, the Pedophile Song, and the iconic covers of Twist and Shout and Boys. Not every song on this album is necessarily amazing. Chains is basically a joke about boomers hating their wives in song form, and even the good songs are repetitive as all hell, but for a first album, it's really damn good. And the repetition doesn't bug me like it does a lot of other people. This would have been a fantastic party album back in the early 60s. Overall, I'd say I respect Please Please Me more than I like it, but I like it a lot, so that should say quite a bit. Not the best Beatles album or anything, but it's way better than it should be, given that it was made by a few guys from Liverpool who had no knowledge of music theory, no professional experience playing instruments, and no connections to the industry. Almost every song on this thing is very catchy and well sung, and I find myself humming songs like Please Please Me and Twist and Shout all the damn time. It's a fun time.
Tomorrow, bitch!
It's opposite day!
Most people consider Help to be the beginning of the transitionary period for the Beatles, in between their early days and their later days. But I have to wonder, is Help the beginning of that era, or is Yesterday the beginning of that era? Yes, this is the album to feature the most covered song in the history of recorded music. And honestly, you're not going to hear many controversial opinions about that song here. Yesterday is a genuine masterpiece and one of the best Beatles songs. That song single-handedly marked the period where the Beatles stopped being a simple boy band and started making songs with mystery, intrigue, complexity, and depth. Yesterday is monumental to the Beatles as musicians, and the band's songwriting catalog wouldn't be the same without it. Of course, though, I still really like the rest of the album. The title track is incredibly catchy and a great tune about getting older. You've Got to Hide Your Love Away is an incredible tune and a unique time signature for the band and has a folky feel, a statement that can also apply to I've Just Seen a Face. Ticket to Ride is also amazing, as is Tell Me What You See, and You Like Me Too Much is really where George started to show his creative flair as a songwriter. The whole album has this incredible acoustic sound to it, and it really shows a different direction for the band. I think Yesterday probably had the most influence on that direction, but to act like many of these other songs aren't also incredible is a straight up mistake. These are songs that solidified that the Beatles were heading in a new direction, and I'm so happy it's a direction they eventually went in. However, not every song on the album is that amazing. Dizzy Miss Lizzy is easily my least favorite song on the album, and honestly, the fact that it ruins the perfect ending set up by Yesterday is a crime. The remaining songs on the album don't particularly do it for me, but they're not awful or anything, just not the best. Songs like The Night Before and You're Going to Lose That Girl are honestly a perfect example of what I mean. They sound more like songs that you would hear on albums like Please Please Me and A Hard Day's Night. However, it's hard for me to criticize this album too much, given that there are amazing songs on it, and what it did for the Beatles was very important. Honestly, this is a great album, and one I consider in extremely high regard. It's not perfect, but the good stuff on this record I just can't ignore. It's incredible.
I had a dream where my mum came to me in the dream saying, it's gonna be okay, just let it be.
A lot of people might be angry that I put this album, Let It Be, ahead of their early stuff in the White Album. This is often considered to be a black sheep album of the Beatles' catalog, since it was so over-orchestrated and also missing one of the best songs from the recording sessions, which seemed pointless because the album was relatively short. And there are a few songs they did include a lot of people don't like, namely Dig It, Maggie May, and The Long and Winding Road. Because of those things, I can't allow myself to put this album much higher. That being said, fuck yeah, I love Let It Be. Even with the superior Let It Be Naked and Get Back albums being released, I still love the original and think it has some absolute bangers on it. For those who don't know, this was the last Beatles album ever released, but the second to last recorded, with the recording sessions for Abbey Road being later. Many fans consider Abbey Road to be the true last Beatles album, even though it was released before. The recording sessions for Let It Be were recently discussed in the Disney Plus documentary series, The Beatles Get Back. And yeah, I do think Abbey Road is considerably better and would have been a perfect send-off for the band. But that doesn't mean this album is worthless or not fantastic in its own right. Two of Us, the album's opening number, is a fantastic John and Paul duo about friendship. Dig a Pony is a wonderfully nonsensical title for a rock song that slaps. Harrison's I Me Mine is among his best with the band. The title song is a sweeping and beautiful masterpiece. I've Got a Feeling is really great with Paul showing off his vocal range, and Get Back is an excellent album send-off, even though I would have preferred the original version, criticizing anti-immigrant attitudes in the UK at that time. And fuck it, I'm a certified The Long and Winding Road enjoyer. It's definitely not the best Beatles song, but I think it's really good for what it is. And Across the Universe is my favorite Beatles song of all time, so it's a shame I didn't include it higher. Even with the inferior Phil Spector mix on the original, it's still ethereal, intriguing, and so beautiful it sends chills down your spine. It's one of the finest compositions I've ever heard. For You Blue and One After 909 are honestly the only proper songs I don't care for on the album, the former mostly because it is just a standard blues number, and the latter because it's a standard rock number. And yeah, Don't Let Me Down should have been on this album. It's one of the best Beatles songs, and honestly, I don't get it. I really want to include this album higher, but I feel as if there are better Beatles albums out there. But it's still like a 9 out of 10 being completely honest. Fantastic album. And keep in mind, we're only just now halfway through the album listing. This is where the fun begins.
Oh, hail the magic of mystery tour.
If an album like Beatles for Sale is a mess in the most boring way possible, and an album like the White Album is a mess in the most inconsistent way possible, Magical Mystery Tour is a mess in the most fun way possible. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, this album barely missed the top 5 only because it is a mess and not very consistent in terms of overarching themes or styles. And there is a reason for that. In its native England, this album wasn't an album at all. Rather, it was an EP, or extended play. It was initially much shorter, containing only the initial 6 songs from the Beatles TV special of the same name. In America, the album was released as a full album, with the first side being the original soundtrack to the TV special, and the second side being a series of songs that had only been released in the UK as singles. For whatever reason, when the British studio albums became the worldwide standard for releases of the Beatles, the American version of the Magical Mystery Tour album was the one that was used. This means that many songs that had been previously released as singles now count towards this album, which explains both why it's so messy and also why it's so fucking good. I'll talk about the sides individually because they each give off a different vibe. The title track is a really good and catchy intro for the special. The Fool on the Hill is one of the most wonderful and simultaneously tragic songs the Beatles ever released. Your Mother Should Know has this great somber feel and a fantastic beat, and John Lennon's trippy as hell masterpiece, I Am the Walrus, is just as fantastic as ever. It's easily the best song on side 1 of the album. The two songs I don't care for on side 1, and honestly the collective album, are the instrumental track Flying and George's song Blue Jay Way. As a matter of fact, Blue Jay Way might be the most boring song George ever wrote. Side 2 is where it gets incredibly messy, but also better in terms of quality. Hello Goodbye is one of the catchiest songs ever released by the band, and that fake out ending is a bitch to remember in the Beatles rock band, but it makes me laugh every time. Penny Lane is one of the most wonderfully nostalgic songs I've ever heard, and complemented its initial A-side perfectly while standing out. I'll get to that A-side in a second. Baby You're a Rich Man is my least favorite song on this side of the album, but to be honest, it leaps and bounds above so many other Beatles songs. It's still great. All You Need Is Love is a fantastic anthem about the thing the Beatles pushed the hardest for in the world. It is iconic to this very day. But nothing the Beatles ever released tops Strawberry Fields Forever, the greatest song the Beatles ever wrote and one of the greatest pieces of popular music ever composed. What this song was able to musically accomplish cannot be overstated. It's an incredible piece of music that will go on through the decades as one of the most complex pop songs of all time. Across the Universe is still my personal favorite Beatles song, but I think from the standpoint of music theory, track editing, instrumentation, and lyricism, this one is the better song. It's absolutely incredible and should be listened to by everyone. Magical Mystery Tour isn't a consistent album, but it is a great one with some of the greatest songs ever released on it. Just go listen to it.
Word up, Yoshi Sor Munchakupas is my name, and I'ma tell you how I beat the IRS at their own game. I lied on my tax forms cause I just don't give a fuck. Now I'm practically swimming around in big bucks.
Most people consider Revolver and the album previous, Rubber Soul, to be the definitive middle point of the Beatles' career, where they finally were starting to experiment and find themselves as musicians. Based on the drugs introduced to them during the recording sessions and the general feel of the album as the result of those drugs, I consider Rubber Soul to be a weed album and Revolver to be an LSD album. And even though I prefer Rubber Soul, as you'll soon see, Revolver is one of the most influential albums ever released by this band, both in terms of the album itself influencing the rest of popular music forever, and the band members' own lives influencing the music. It was by this point that John Lennon had taken LSD for the first time, Paul McCartney was looking into more obscure and strange songwriting methods, and George Harrison was getting deep into Indian culture and spirituality, all things that would leave the band permanently changed. And the album is a near masterpiece because of these things. Taxman is an excellent opener that serves as a scathing critique of the British government's tax system. Eleanor Rigby is one of the most iconic and tragic songs the Beatles ever penned. I'm Only Sleeping shows off the newly founded trippy side of Lennon's songwriting style, and Love You Too was George's first foray into Indian-inspired songwriting. Yellow Submarine is pretty good. Yeah, I hate to say it, but I'm not head over heels in love with the song like a ton of others are. But it's good. She Said is such a trippy philosophical dive, and it makes you feel so unsure of yourself. Good Day Sunshine is such a catchy little beat that makes you feel good. And Your Bird Can Sing is alright, not my favorite song or anything, same goes for Dr. Robert. But that being said, this album has two genuine masterpieces on it that should be listened to by everyone. Here, There, and Everywhere, and Tomorrow Never Knows. The former is one of the best love songs the Beatles ever wrote, and the only song Paul McCartney ever wrote that John Lennon complimented him on. The latter is a strange and psychedelic dive into Indian philosophy, and it sounds unlike any other popular song I've ever heard. For a lot of people it might be overstimulating, but I think it's a masterpiece. This album is kinda inconsistent in terms of tone, but unlike the White Album or Magical Mystery Tour, it feels completely intentional. It feels like the Beatles wanted to take the listener on a journey that surprises them, where they would never know what kind of song is coming next. And at that, they succeeded. Revolver is a masterful album that I'm happy to listen to over and over again.
Do you want to pretend to be Ringo?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, baby! A Hard Day's Night is the most straight up fun album the Beatles ever released, and is easily the best album of their early days. Similar to Help, this album is split between Side 1, which features the soundtrack to the feature film of the same name, and Side 2, which features other songs from the recording sessions. And this album just instantly puts me in a good mood whenever I turn it on. There's no other word for it. The rest of the Beatles catalog can be described as cute and catchy or as deep and meaningful, but this album just puts a smile on your face from start to finish. The title track is among the Fab Four's most famous and well-known songs ever. I Should Have Known Better is an upbeat jam. I'm Happy Just to Dance With You is such a pure and innocent song for George. And I Love Her is one of the best songs for a slow dance with your partner I've ever heard. Tell Me Why is probably my least favorite song on this side of the album, but it's still pretty good. Can't Buy Me Love is a certified banger and easily my second favorite song on the album. It's so damn good and catchy. For the second side of the album, Anytime at All fills me with hope for my relationship with my amazing girlfriend. Babe, if you're watching this, I love you. I'll Cry Instead is a great pity dick song, and Things We Said Today has some fantastic harmonies and surprisingly deep lyrics for this early in their songwriting catalog. I honestly wish I'll Be Back was in the movie. It's probably my third favorite song from the album. The only song I straight up don't like is You Can't Do That. It's not catchy and the lyrics are creepy. Thank God it's not the last song on the album. But without a doubt, my favorite song on the album is If I Fell, an incredible piece about re-entering a relationship after heartbreak. It's a relatable feeling for a lot of people as far as insecurities go, and the Beatles summarized how that feels perfectly. Utterly amazing track. This is a great party album that goes alongside a fantastic movie, and I couldn't recommend it more. I would go as far as to say it's probably the best Beatles album to start with if you're unsure of how you want to go about listening to them. If you want to try the Beatles' early stuff to see how much you like it, I'd say start here. It's an amazing album unlike any other by this band. Outstanding.
Here comes my son, do. Here comes my son, and I say he's an egg.
Okay, now we're at the big boy albums. All three of these albums I would honestly give a 10 out of 10 score to. I genuinely think they're masterpieces that should be listened to in full by every music lover. These are albums that changed how we listen to and write music forever and have been upheld as the golden standard for popular music. Abbey Road is one of the most famous albums of all time, and for good damn reason. As the Beatles' last album recorded, it feels like a proper send-off, as if the Beatles really sat down and said, we're only doing one more of these, so let's make it as amazing as we possibly can. And the result was this album. It's honestly a shame this album was released before Let It Be, because I feel like this album would be held in even higher regard if that were the case, and Let It Be would be held in far less contempt. But either way, this is one of the finest albums ever made, and we're going to talk about it. The opening track, Come Together, may blatantly rip off Chuck Berry's You Can't Catch Me in parts, but it's still an incredible opening track that stands on its own. Something is in my top 3 favorite Beatles songs, and is easily the best love song the band ever wrote. George Harrison killed it with this incredible song that makes me tear up thinking about how wonderful love is. Maxwell's Silver Hammer slaps, and all the haters will never convince me otherwise, even if John Lennon does a better version.
Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer down upon his head.
Octopus's Garden is a fantastic upbeat jam that shows off Ringo's creative ideas lyrically. Here Comes the Sun is justifiably one of the most popular songs ever released by the band by being the perfect blend of Western and Indian songwriting styles. And because is one of the most hauntingly beautiful sounds I've ever heard on record. It feels as if the whole world stops when you're listening to it. However, there is one song on this side of the album that fucking sucks, and I don't get the hype for it.
What? What?
Get welded.
Wait! I command you!
Have good opinions!
I don't wanna.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. From the first time I ever listened to this album, I intensely disliked I Want You compared to the rest of the album. I think it's a fucking drag on what is otherwise such an amazing album. I think it's so repetitive that it's aggravatingly boring and completely unprovocative. I don't feel anything at all listening to it. Despite a couple of cool ideas musically, the song still doesn't work for me because none of them are expanded upon. They're just played over and over again. And I'm fully prepared to get hated on for this. So many people consider this in their top 10 or even top 5 Beatles songs, and it's honestly one of their worst and most frustrating for me personally. I don't get the hype. Moving on from that though, what I do get the hype for is side B to this album. containing a medley of songs often referred to as the Long One or the Abbey Road Medley. And it's incredibly touching, musically interesting, has amazing harmonies, has overwhelmingly beautiful instrumentation, singing, and playing from all 4 members of the band. It's just amazing. Each piece feels as if it could be enjoyed separately, and they can, but the true beauty comes through listening to the entire side as a whole. From the gentle and mysterious piano introduced in You Never Give Me Your Money, to the allure and poetic beauty of She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, up until that beautifully chilling, iconic line in the end that always gets me. In the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. Fucking masterful medley of songs that caps off the career of one of the most successful and famous bands in the history of Western music. You've probably already listened to this album and gained your own strong feelings about it, so I won't go on much longer. But if you haven't, Abbey Road by the Beatles is an incredible work of art I can't stop coming back to time and time again. Except for I Want You. I don't come back to that. I'm sorry.
Good for your soul.
Oh, please. I have no soul.
This is the other end of the Beatles' in-between period, and it's a frickin' masterpiece. George Harrison said in interviews that he feels Rubber Soul was the best album the Beatles ever made. And while I don't 100% agree with him on that, I could not see more what he was talking about. Rubber Soul is genius from start to finish. Or at least start to penultimate song and then the finish is really weird and should not have been the last song. I mean, Drive My Car is one of the best openings to a Beatles album. You Won't See Me is a wonderfully somber breakup song. Nowhere Man is one of my all-time favorites with the band. It's such a great philosophical look at a person's mind. Think for Yourself and The Word are both catchy as hell. Michelle is such a beautiful romantic song. Girl is so good that I don't even mind the sniffing that would be obnoxious in any other song. And If I Needed Someone is one of George's absolute best, and honestly the song that should have ended the album. The song that did end the album is one called Run For Your Life, and honestly the lyrics are creepy and stalkery as fuck, and while it musically slaps, it isn't last song on the album good in my humble opinion. The 2 masterpieces from this one are Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown, and In My Life. The former of which is one of the most intriguing and mysterious pop songs ever released with an incredible acoustic feel, and the latter of which is a bittersweet melody reflecting on the beauty of life and inevitability of death we all share. This was an album made after the Beatles were introduced to weed by Bob Dylan of the Rolling Stones, and it feels like the most chill Beatles album. It's a good album to just kick up your feet and relax to, or even listen to while you're stoned if you're into that. I don't personally smoke, so I cannot confirm that last point, but it feels like an album made for that sort of thing. Either way, it's a masterful album, and probably the album the least number of people have heard out of this top 3. I think it's incredible, and brings out the best emotions in all of us. Love, energy, bittersweetness, longing, sadness, it has it all. It's honestly a contender for the number 1 spot. However, there is one album I do like more. Yeah, everyone probably saw this one coming. But honestly, there's a reason for it. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is not just the best Beatles album, it's in my top 5 favorite albums of all time. In my opinion, this album is a complete and whole masterpiece without a single bad track. It's impossible to do such a wonderful album justice with one short segment of a YouTube video. But I'll try. This album was inspired by the Beatles' decision to stop touring. So they made an album where the concept was that a band led by Sgt. Pepper is giving a concert for the audience. It's a strange and meta concept, but it went over big and advanced so much about how we listen to and create music and albums. It's often considered to be among the first ever proper concept albums, and helped to bridge the gap between popular media and higher forms of art. It innovated having the editing process of a song playing just as much a role in how it sounds as the recording process. And it was even a huge deal from the aspect of graphic design, with the record sleeves lyrics and design being eye-catching and helping people get into the album. This album changed everything, and is among the best-selling and most beloved albums of all time. And the music listing helps cement that even further. The album opens with the title track, which immediately leads into another song called With a Little Help from My Friends. I don't personally know if this had been done before in a popular album, where one song cleanly led into another as if they were one track, but the Beatles definitely popularized the concept. What helps is that both of these songs are amazing and iconic, being incredibly catchy, having great harmonies from the other band members, and being instrumented with both typical rock instruments and a full orchestra. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds might not actually be about LSD, but it is a song only a person high on the drug could have written, with the incredible changing keys, time signatures, and tempos. It's Getting Better perfectly complements Paul McCartney's continual optimism and John Lennon's pessimistic point of view. Fixing a Hole is probably my least favorite song on the album, but it's still like an 8 out of 10 to be completely honest, and is still very catchy and wonderfully trippy. She's Leaving Home is my personal favorite song on the album and in my top 5 favorite Beatles songs ever. I think it's immensely relatable for a lot of people, and shows the tragedy and complexity of not being happy in a family environment. Being for the benefit of Mr. Kite is such a great circus number and helps get one into the idea that this is a live concert in concept. Within You Without You is one of George's many masterpieces with the band, and is the song where his interest in Indian culture really comes through in his songwriting. When I'm 64 is a little ditty, but it's the best little ditty the Beatles ever made. Lovely Rita is such a cute love song with some great vocals from Paul. Good Morning is rhythmically a mess, but it's a really damn enjoyable mess that I love listening to. The reprise of the title song then leads into what is widely considered to be the best song on the album, A Day in the Life. And yeah, this is one of John Lennon's absolute best songs of all time. The way it starts with such a simple acoustic guitar riff before getting into some of the most simply tragic lyrics of any Beatles song, talking about the surprise of death and how messy life can be. After a scary-ass instrumental section, Paul's section serves as a great offset, showing someone truly going through a day in their life. John has one last verse before the instrumental takes over, allowing you to contemplate whatever it was you just heard. And the album ends. The feeling you're left with upon the album ending truly is a type of magical feeling only an album from this era can accomplish. This was when music was in its era of finally being considered an art form, and this was one of the albums that pushed the envelope for that. The only way this album could honestly be any better is if Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever were on the album as initially planned, since they were part of the recording sessions. But that means one or two of these songs potentially had to get cut, and I would never want that for this album. They picked the exact right songs to make this album work, and I don't know that I'd have it any other way. It truly is the best Beatles album ever, and a crowning achievement for music. It's simply a masterpiece. Good night, Underground.
Yo, Pops, you should get a Wi-Fi box.
Son, I already have a Wi-Fi. A Wi-Fi beat.
Dad, you're a shitty fucking dad. You know that? Yeah, shut the fuck up or I'll beat you too.